My mother had spent 3 years telling our neighborhood that I was the daughter who never finished anything. Then, at our annual block party, a woman from the mayor's office walked into the crowd and asked for me by name. "Is Naomi Vasquez here?" I raised my hand. She smiled. "Good. We've been looking everywhere for you." My mother stopped moving. The woman continued, completely unaware of what she had just exposed. "The mayor wants the lead engineer of the Allegheny Riverfront project to cut the ribbon next month." She looked directly at me. "That's you, correct?" I said yes. My mother stared at me as if she had never seen me before. Then she whispered, "You're the engineer?" I looked at her. "I'm the lead engineer." She still didn't understand, not until the woman added, "You're the reason the pedestrian bridge is being built." My mother's face went completely still, because 18 months earlier, she had personally signed a letter asking the city to remove that bridge from my project. She had spent years telling everyone I couldn't finish anything. And without knowing it, she had spent 8 months trying to delay the biggest thing I had ever built. My name is Naomi Vasquez. I'm 30 years old, and for the past 4 years I had been the lead civil engineer for a $60 million flood control and riverfront revitalization project along Pittsburgh's Allegheny River. It was not glamorous work. There were no red carpets, no magazine covers, and no one outside the engineering world cared about the hundreds of hours spent checking calculations that nobody would ever see. But the project mattered. 3 neighborhoods had experienced serious flooding in the previous decade, including Riverside, where my mother lived. Water had reached basements, damaged roads, closed businesses, and forced families to leave their homes during storms. The city wanted a new flood wall and drainage system. My firm had submitted a proposal against 3 larger companies with bigger staffs and more impressive portfolios. Our proposal won because I argued that flood protection shouldn't turn the riverfront into a concrete barrier people hated. I designed green space into the plan, improved pedestrian access, and proposed a 200-foot suspension bridge connecting Riverside to the medical clinic on the opposite side of the river. It wasn't an unnecessary decoration. It would be the only ADA-accessible crossing along that stretch of the river, meaning elderly residents, people using wheelchairs, patients walking to appointments, and anyone without a car would no longer need to travel nearly 4 miles to reach the next bridge. The County Planning Commission praised the design because it solved the engineering problem without forgetting the people who had to live beside it. For 4 years, I coordinated with city departments, county planners, the Army Corps of Engineers, contractors, environmental consultants, and more than 200 construction workers. I fought over budgets, revised drainage calculations, defended structural decisions, attended public meetings, and spent countless nights making sure the thing would actually work when the river rose. It was the hardest project I had ever taken on. It was also the first professional accomplishment I had ever been completely certain about. My mother knew almost none of that. Her name was Sandra Vasquez, and she had been president of the Riverside Neighborhood Association for 6 years. She was organized, outspoken, stubborn, and deeply protective of the street where she had lived most of her adult life. She carried a clipboard everywhere. She knew which residents had complained about parking, which house had an unapproved fence, which family was behind on association dues, and which city official had promised something at which meeting. She knew everything about the neighborhood. Somehow, she had never learned much about me. When I was in college, I changed majors twice before settling on civil engineering. Sandra remembered the uncertainty, not what came after it. For the last 3 years, she had introduced me to people as the one who never finished anything. She never said it with obvious cruelty. That was what made it harder to fight. She said it smiling. Naomi's still figuring herself out. She's always been a little indecisive. She starts strong, but finishing has never really been her thing. The first few times, I corrected her. She laughed. The next time, she told everyone I was being sensitive. Eventually, I stopped correcting her because I discovered something painful. Sometimes defending yourself in front of the wrong person only gives them another opportunity to make you look like the problem. The Riverside Spring Block Party happened every May on Ferndale Street. Folding tables sat beneath the sycamores. Children played near the sidewalks. Someone's husband always burned part of the food on the grill, while insisting he had everything under control. Neighbors stood around discussing property taxes and the weather. My mother ran the event with the precision of someone preparing for a national emergency. About 20 minutes after I arrived, she introduced me to a new neighbor named Carol. "This is my daughter, Naomi," Sandra said. "She's still figuring out what she wants to do with her life. Some people take longer than others." Carol looked at me kindly. "What do you do?" Before I could answer, my mother laughed. "Oh, she's always got some project going. Engineering, I think. She changes things around." I looked at Sandra. She smiled as if she had just given an accurate professional biography. "Civil engineering," I said quietly. "Oh, right," she replied. Then she turned back to Carol. "Anyway, Carol, you should meet Linda. She knows everyone on this street." I picked up a plate and walked toward the grill. I didn't argue. I had learned that my mother's version of me survived because she repeated it confidently, not because it was true. 20 minutes later, a black SUV stopped along the curb. A woman in a gray blazer stepped out, followed by two men carrying a rolled banner. "Sorry to interrupt," she called. "I'm looking for the president of the Riverside Neighborhood Association." My mother immediately straightened. "That's me." The woman introduced herself as Deborah Yun, from the mayor's office. She explained that the city was finalizing the riverfront ribbon-cutting ceremony and wanted to coordinate with the neighborhood, because Riverside would benefit directly from the project. My mother smiled. "We've been waiting a long time. Half this street flooded in 2019. I hope the city actually fixed the drainage this time, instead of spending money on something that just looks good in a rendering." Deborah nodded professionally. The drainage capacity was redesigned to handle a 100-year flood event. My mother looked pleased. "Good," Deborah continued. "The lead engineer also redesigned the pedestrian connection, so the bridge integrates with the flood wall instead of being treated as a separate structure." My mother's smile disappeared for half a second. "The bridge?" she asked. "Yes," Deborah said. "That was one of the most important design decisions." My mother folded her arms. "I have concerns about that bridge." Deborah looked at her tablet. "Actually, I believe the lead engineer is already here." She scanned the crowd. "Naomi Vasquez is listed as a Riverside resident. Is Naomi here today?" The street went quiet. Not completely, but enough that I suddenly heard things I hadn't noticed before. The hiss of the grill, the clink of a glass being set down, the distant sound of traffic. I lifted my hand. "That's me." Deborah smiled. "Perfect. The mayor specifically wants you to cut the ribbon." My mother turned toward me. "You," Deborah looked between us. "Yes. Naomi has led the project from the design phase through construction." My mother's expression changed. "You led it?" she asked. "I did." "For how long?" 4 years, she stared at me. Deborah continued explaining the ceremony details. "The mayor feels the lead engineer should be the person standing there. You're the one who knows what residents are actually getting." I thanked her and agreed. My mother said nothing. Then Deborah added almost casually, "There was quite a bit of early community opposition, but the additional public process ultimately improved the design." I noticed my mother's face change again. "What opposition?" I asked. Deborah glanced at her tablet. Several residents and the neighborhood association had concerns about the bridge. Nothing unusual for a project this size. My mother suddenly looked away. I didn't understand why. I didn't ask her there. But that night, the sentence stayed with me. I opened my laptop and searched the public planning records. I knew the project history. I knew the standard objections, construction noise, traffic, temporary road closures, environmental concerns, but I had never heard about serious opposition to the bridge from Riverside itself. The next morning, I went to my office before anyone else arrived. I pulled the complete public comment archive. Meeting after meeting appeared on the screen. Then I found a document dated 18 months earlier. The heading read, Riverside Neighborhood Association. Formal opposition to pedestrian bridge. The letter argued that the bridge was unnecessary, would increase pedestrian traffic, and could accelerate development and rising property taxes. It requested that the city remove the bridge and proceed with a simpler flood wall-only design. I read the final paragraph twice. Then I reached the signature, Sandra Vasquez, President, Riverside Neighborhood Association. My mother, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. 18 months earlier, I had been fighting my own firm to keep that bridge in the project. I had spent 3 weeks building a cost-benefit analysis, proving that the bridge was worth keeping. I had argued that accessibility wasn't an optional feature. I had defended the project against budget cuts. I had stayed late rewriting the proposal because I believed that bridge would change people's daily lives. And at exactly the same time, my mother had been using her position to tell the city that the bridge should disappear. She had never asked what I was doing. She had simply decided she already knew who I was. I didn't call my mother that morning. I didn't even text her. I sat at my desk with the opposition letter open on one monitor and the project schedule on the other, trying to understand how something so personal could have existed inside, something so professional without me ever noticing. The signature was hers. The association letterhead was official. The date was real. The hearings were real. But before I allowed myself to turn anger into certainty, I needed the complete timeline. I called the city planning department and asked for the public comment record. A clerk named Robert pulled the file while I waited. The Riverside Association letter triggered additional review, he said. There were 4 additional community sessions. I already knew that. How much did it affect the project schedule? I asked. He paused. Approximately 8 months. I closed my eyes. 8 months. Can you confirm the association was the primary source of the bridge objection? I asked. Yes, he said. There were individual residents with concerns, but the formal association letter was the main organized objection. I thanked him. Before hanging up, I asked one more question. Was Sandra Vasquez present at the hearings? Robert checked. Yes. She spoke at several. I thanked him again and ended the call. 8 months. I looked at the project schedule. 8 months was not an abstract number. It meant missing the original construction window. It meant another flood season with the old system still in place. It meant contractor availability had changed. It meant additional engineering and review costs. It meant residents waited longer for protection that had already been designed. My mother had spent years saying she was protecting Riverside, but her letter had delayed the thing. Riverside needed most. Then I noticed something else. The bridge had been the only part of the design she specifically targeted. That mattered. The flood wall wasn't her main concern. The drainage system wasn't her main concern. She had focused on the bridge because she believed it would bring outsiders into the neighborhood and accelerate development. She hadn't understood why the bridge existed. She had decided that because it was visible and attractive, it must be unnecessary. I drove to my Aunt Rosa's house that evening. Rosa had served on the association board with my mother for years before stepping away. She read the letter without looking surprised. She pushed hard on this, Rosa said. How hard? She was the strongest voice against it. Why? Rosa sighed. She was afraid. Of a bridge? Of what came after it? She thought more foot traffic would bring development. More development meant higher property taxes. She thought longtime residents would eventually be forced out. So she thought she was protecting the neighborhood. Yes. And she didn't know what the bridge actually did? Not really. I looked at Rosa. Did she know I was the lead engineer? No. I laughed once. Of course she didn't. Rosa frowned. Naomi. She never asked. That doesn't mean she doesn't care about you. I know. But she cares about the version of me she remembers. Rosa didn't answer. I looked down at the letter. 4 years, Rosa. I talked about this project at family dinners. I told her when we got the contract. I told her when construction started. I told her when the county threatened to cut the bridge. I told her when we won approval. I told her the bridge was staying. She never once asked what I actually did. Rosa was quiet. That's why this hurts more than the letter, I said. The letter proves she opposed my work. But the fact that she didn't even know it was, mine proves she never bothered to understand me. Rosa reached across the table and touched my hand. Maybe this is the first time she has to. I wasn't ready to think about that yet. The following morning, I opened the original project files from 18 months earlier. I wanted to remember exactly what I had been fighting for when my mother was fighting against it. The budget review had suggested cutting the bridge to save money. I had argued that removing it would eliminate the only accessible crossing in that section of the riverfront. I had prepared a presentation showing the additional travel distance without it. I had interviewed staff from the medical clinic. I had spoken with accessibility advocates. I had revised the foundation design to reduce cost without sacrificing the crossing. I remembered one woman in particular from the clinic. Her name was Mrs. Okafor. She used a walker and had told the commission that the next bridge might as well have been 20 miles away because she could not safely navigate the route to it. "People keep calling the bridge an extra," she had said. "It doesn't feel extra to the people who need it." I had never forgotten that sentence. Apparently, my mother had. That was when I understood something that made the situation more complicated. Sandra hadn't intentionally tried to sabotage me. She hadn't known she was opposing her daughter. But the absence of intention didn't erase the consequence. She had used her position, her credibility, and the association's letterhead to influence a public project. Her fear had become a decision. Her decision had become a delay, and the delay had real consequences. I decided to tell her 4 days before the ribbon cutting. Sunday dinner seemed appropriate. So many of her comments about my unfinished life had happened around that table. My father, Miguel, was there. He had always been quieter than my mother, but he noticed more than she realized. We ate normally. Then I placed the letter on the table. My mother looked at it. She recognized the letterhead first, then her signature. Her eyes moved slowly to me. "Where did you get this?" "The city planning file." She picked it up. "That was the association's position. You signed it. I was president. You argued it in the hearings." She looked defensive. "I was representing the neighborhood. You delayed the project 8 months." She stopped. My father lowered his glass. "I didn't know that," she said. "You were there. I knew there were additional meetings." "I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never asked." Her face hardened. "I don't like where this is going." "I don't either." I took a breath. 4 years, Mom. 4 years I've been leading this project." She stared at me. "You didn't know?" "No, you didn't know because you never asked." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I thought you were working on the river project," she said. "I was. I didn't know you were the lead. That is the problem." She put the letter down. "I was trying to protect this neighborhood. You delayed flood protection. I didn't know the bridge was connected to. You could have asked." She looked at me. "The bridge is the only accessible crossing on that stretch," I said. "It connects residents to the clinic. People without cars use it. Elderly patients use it. People with mobility problems use it. You called it an unnecessary aesthetic addition." Her face changed. "I didn't know. You never asked." She looked down at the table. "I thought the city wanted it because it looked good. You had access to the person who designed it." She looked at me. "You." "Yes." Silence filled the room. My father finally spoke. "Sandra, you keep explaining what you were afraid of. She's telling you what happened because of it." My mother looked at him, then at me. "I spent 3 years telling people you couldn't finish anything," she whispered. I didn't answer. "And you were finishing this?" "Yes." "I was standing in the way." "Yes." Her eyes filled. "I didn't know. That doesn't make the 8 months disappear." "I know. I don't need you to fix it tonight." "I know. The ceremony is in 4 days. I wanted you to hear this from me before it becomes public." My mother picked up the letter. "If they mention the opposition," she said, "I'll tell them. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She looked directly at me. "I signed it publicly. I argued publicly. If I was willing to say I was right in front of everyone, I can say I was wrong in front of everyone." I wasn't expecting that, neither was my father. My mother folded the letter carefully. Then she said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "I thought I was protecting Riverside because I was afraid of losing it. But I was so busy protecting the neighborhood. I remembered that I never noticed the daughter I had in front of me. I didn't forgive her that night. But for the first time, I believed she might finally understand what she had done." The ribbon-cutting ceremony was held on the bridge itself. The river moved beneath us, reflecting the morning light. The steel cables rose above the walkway, and the new flood wall curved along the riverbank, behind the crowd. Reporters from 2 local stations stood near the podium. City officials gathered beside the mayor. Construction workers who had spent years building the project stood together near the front. Dozens of Riverside residents filled the walkway. I had prepared a 3-sentence speech, thank the residents, thank the workers, explain why the project mattered. That was it. I had deliberately left my mother out. Deborah found me before the ceremony. The mayor is going to mention the early opposition, she said. Nothing specific, just that community feedback changed the project. That's fine. She hesitated. Are you sure? I looked toward my mother. She had arrived early. She wasn't carrying her clipboard. I'm sure. My mother stood near the front, hands folded in front of her. She looked different. Not younger, not weaker, just less certain. She caught my eye and nodded. The mayor began the ceremony. He thanked the construction crews, the county planning commission, the city departments, and the residents who had endured months of detours and construction noise. Then he turned toward me. I want to recognize Naomi Vasquez, the lead engineer of this project and a longtime Riverside resident. Applause broke out. I stepped forward, the mayor continued. She didn't simply design a flood control system. She designed a riverfront that residents could actually use. The pedestrian bridge behind us provides an accessible crossing that did not exist before. And the drainage improvements protect neighborhoods that have spent years living with the threat of flooding. I looked at my mother. She was listening. The mayor paused. This project wasn't without disagreement. Community members raised concerns, and those concerns resulted in additional public review. That process extended the timeline, but ultimately helped us reach a better result. He stepped back. I reached for the scissors. Then my mother spoke. Mr. Mayor. The crowd turned. The mayor stopped. My mother stepped forward. I was part of that disagreement. A murmur moved through the crowd. I was president of the Riverside Neighborhood Association when we opposed the pedestrian bridge 18 months ago. I felt my stomach tighten, she continued. I signed the letter. I argued against it at the hearings. I believed I was protecting this neighborhood. Nobody moved. I was afraid the bridge would bring more traffic. I was afraid it would accelerate development. I was afraid people who had lived here for decades would eventually be unable to afford their own homes. She paused, and because I was afraid, I decided I understood the project before I understood the people behind it. She looked at me. I was wrong. The silence deepened. I didn't know what the bridge was actually for. I didn't know it would create an accessible route to the medical clinic. I didn't know how many residents would depend on it. And I didn't know that the engineer who fought to keep it in the project was my daughter. Someone in the crowd whispered. My mother continued. I had spent 3 years telling people. Naomi was the one who never finished anything. Her voice shook. I said it at parties. I said it at meetings. I said it to neighbors. I said it so many times that I stopped asking whether it was true. She looked at me, and while I was saying it, she was finishing this. The crowd looked toward the bridge. She was finishing the most complicated project this neighborhood has ever needed. My mother's eyes filled, and I was standing in her way without even knowing her name was attached to it. I couldn't breathe for a second. She turned toward the mayor. My letter contributed to the delay. I can't change that. I can't give the city those 8 months back. I can't give Riverside back the flood season they spent waiting. But I can stop pretending I was right. She faced the crowd. I owe this neighborhood an apology. Then she looked at me. And I owe my daughter one. No one applauded immediately. It was too real for applause. A woman near the front reached over and touched my mother's arm. The mayor stepped aside. My mother returned to her place. I looked at her. I had imagined this moment differently. For weeks, I had thought about what it would feel like to expose her hypocrisy. I had imagined the satisfaction of watching the neighborhood learn that the daughter she called unfinished was the engineer who had protected their homes. I had imagined the silence after the truth came out, but standing there, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired and strangely relieved. I walked toward the microphone. Thank you, I said. My voice was quiet. The microphone carried it across the bridge. All of it. Then I cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted into applause. The cables behind me caught the sunlight. People began walking across the bridge. A reporter approached me almost immediately. How does it feel to see 4 years of work finally finished? I looked at the bridge. Honestly, I said, it feels like I can finally stop explaining why it mattered. That sentence ended up in the local news story. But the part that mattered most to me happened afterward. A man approached from the far side of the bridge. He was older, walking slowly with a cane. He introduced himself as Harold. He lived near the clinic. I used to drive all the way around, he told me. 4 miles. I nodded. Now I can walk. He looked at the bridge. Thank you. That was when I finally understood why I had fought so hard to keep it, not because it was my project. Not because I wanted my mother to be proud. Not because I needed anyone to recognize my title. Because Harold could walk across it. Because Mrs. Okafor could reach the clinic. Because the neighborhood would have flood protection. Because something I had drawn on a screen, years earlier, now existed beneath people's feet. My mother watched the conversation from several yards away. She didn't interrupt. She didn't tell Harold who she was. She didn't make the moment about herself. She simply listened. Later that afternoon, she called me. I meant everything I said, she told me. I know. I should have asked. Yes. I don't know how I missed all of it. You weren't looking. She was quiet. Then she said, "Can I ask you something now?" Sure. What made you choose engineering? I stopped walking. It was such a simple question. She had never asked it, not once. I leaned against the railing of the bridge. I liked solving problems, I said, and I liked the idea that something I designed could still matter when I wasn't there to see it. My mother was silent, then she said, "I think I understand that now." I smiled. Maybe. No, she said. I really do. And for the first time in years, we talked about my work without arguing. My mother didn't become a different person overnight. That would have been easier to write, but it wouldn't have been true. Sandra still carried her clipboard to neighborhood meetings. She still worried about property taxes. She still had strong opinions about development. She still called people when they parked too close to a hydrant. The difference was that she started asking questions before deciding what she believed. A month after the ribbon cutting, she asked if she could attend one of my project presentations. I almost laughed. You're sure? I want to understand. You know it's going to be 3 hours. I've survived association meetings. That isn't the same thing. It might be worse. I smiled. She came anyway. She sat in the back of the conference room and listened while I presented a smaller flood control project. I explained hydraulic modeling, drainage capacity, foundation requirements, soil conditions, accessibility standards, and construction sequencing. She didn't understand everything. She wasn't supposed to. But afterward, she asked questions. Why did you choose that material? Why does the water move that direction? How do you know the system will handle a storm that large? Who checks your calculations? Who decides whether the city accepts the design? They weren't sophisticated questions. They were better. They were curious. For the first time, my mother was meeting the person I had become, instead of talking to the person she remembered. She also did something I hadn't asked her to do. She contacted the planning department and requested that the Riverside Association's original opposition record be supplemented with a statement acknowledging the project's final outcome. She didn't ask them to remove her letter. She didn't try to erase the delay. She didn't rewrite history. She added context that mattered. Because she wasn't trying to pretend she had never been wrong. She was accepting that she had. Rosa told me about it later. She told the board that before they oppose another project, they need to talk to the people who designed it. I laughed. What exactly did she say? Rosa smiled. She said, maybe we should ask one more question before deciding what we hate. That sounded exactly like my mother, but it was still progress. A few weeks later, something even smaller happened. I was at the grocery store with Sandra when a neighbor approached us. Is this your daughter? My mother smiled. Yes. Then she looked at me. This is Naomi. She's a civil engineer. I almost stopped walking. That was it. No joke. No explanation. No, she's still figuring things out. No reminder that I had changed majors. No comment about how long it took me to find my direction. Just my name. My profession, the truth. It was such a small sentence that nobody else noticed anything unusual. I did, because for 3 years, I had been waiting for my mother to acknowledge what I had built. I thought it would happen at the ribbon cutting. It didn't. It happened in a grocery store aisle. And suddenly I realized something I hadn't understood before. The ribbon cutting hadn't actually been about proving my mother wrong. The bridge wasn't built to win an argument. The flood wall wasn't designed to impress her. My career wasn't a response to her criticism. I had spent too much time thinking that my accomplishments needed to become evidence against someone else's opinion. They didn't. My work had value before my mother understood it. My life had value before she recognized it. I had finished things before she admitted I could. That was the part I needed to learn, because being underestimated by someone you love creates a dangerous temptation. You start measuring your success by their reaction. You want the promotion, so they'll finally respect you. You want the degree, so they'll finally admit you were capable. You want the house, the business, the project, the award, the title. Not only because you want those things, but because somewhere inside, you hope they will force someone else to change their mind. And when that happens, their opinion still controls you. I didn't want that anymore. My mother had spent years seeing an old version of me. I couldn't force her to update her memory, but I could stop using her memory as the measuring stick for my life. That realization changed the way I thought about everything that had happened. The opposition letter still mattered. The 8-month delay still mattered. The flood season still mattered. My mother's public apology mattered. But what mattered most was that I had learned the truth about myself before the ceremony ever happened. I was not the girl who couldn't finish. I was the woman who had stayed with a complicated project for 4 years. While people argued over it, budgets changed, plans were revised, and problems appeared that nobody could have predicted. I had finished. I just hadn't needed my mother to certify it. Sometimes families don't hurt us because they don't love us. Sometimes they hurt us because they stop updating their understanding of us. They remember who we were at 17 and keep talking to that person when we're 30. They remember the mistakes and forget the growth. They remember the uncertainty and overlook the discipline that came after it. They remember the things we started and forget the things we quietly completed. And sometimes, it takes a public moment to force the truth into the open. For me, it was a woman from the mayor's office asking one simple question. Is Naomi here? That question changed everything. It forced my mother to discover that the daughter she called unfinished had spent 4 years finishing something that protected the very neighborhood she claimed to care about. But the real ending wasn't my mother's apology. It wasn't the ribbon. It wasn't the cameras. It wasn't even the bridge. The real ending was the first time she asked me a question because she genuinely wanted to know the answer. What made you choose engineering? It was such a simple question. But sometimes a question is an apology before the person asking. It knows how to say sorry. My mother had spent years telling people who I was. Finally, she became curious enough to ask me. And I finally understood that I didn't need to be angry about the years she missed. I just needed to decide what I would do with the years ahead. The Riverside Bridge is still there. People cross it every day. The flood wall protects homes during storms. The medical clinic is easier to reach. Children ride bicycles along the river. Older residents walk across the bridge with walkers and canes. Most of them don't know the arguments that happened before it existed. They don't know about the opposition letter. They don't know about the 8-month delay. They don't know that the woman who helped build it was once introduced as someone who never finished anything. And that's okay, because the bridge doesn't need to know. It simply does its job. Maybe that's the best thing I could have built. Not proof, not revenge, not a monument to an argument with my mother. Just something useful, something that works. Something that remains standing after everyone who argued about it has gone home. My name is Naomi Vasquez. I'm 30 years old. I'm a civil engineer, and I spent 4 years leading the flood control and pedestrian bridge redesign along Pittsburgh's Allegheny River. My mother once believed I was the daughter who never finished anything. Then she stood on the bridge I designed, and finally understood that she had been looking at me without really seeing me. If you've ever been underestimated by someone you love, remember this. You don't have to spend your life proving them wrong. You don't have to destroy them. You don't even have to make them apologize. Keep becoming the person you know you are. Keep finishing what matters. Keep building what helps people, because one day, the truth may become impossible to ignore. And when that day comes, the best victory isn't hearing someone say, I was wrong. It's realizing you no longer needed them to be right about you in the first place. That was the moment I stopped being the daughter. my mother remembered. Anne became the woman I had already been all along.